Good afternoon. My name is John Toller. I'm the CEO of Evergreen Enterprises, and I'm coming to you today trying to explain what is happening in our industry as relates to the recent escalation of tariffs. I've had several of my sales team members, customer service reps, retailers reach out, even vendors and rep agencies reach out and say, can someone put something together to explain what this means to the gift garden and home industry, this recent escalation of tariffs that we've seen over the last 2 weeks. I'm specifically talking about how we went from that 50% out of China. I think we're seeing about 145% out of China, and what this means going forward. So I put together some notes here that I'm going to reference, and I'll try to explain this. Obviously, always here to answer any questions. We'll put my email address up on this, and you can drop me a note, and I'll try to answer your question. So the first thing is, let me kind of go back in terms of what this means for pricing in the industry. And I'm going to use a $1 China cost Christmas ornament. We would call that it's a $1 FOB ornament out of China. And I'll just use this pen. Costs $1. And in December, when we started to sell Christmas, and this goes for the entire industry, as vendors were selling Christmas at winter markets, they were selling what they believed was a $1 FOB cost item. And they would land that in the United States, and there's kind of two other costs, major costs are involved in that item. One would be tariff, and one would be ocean freight. And so maybe they're landing that item, that Christmas ornament, for $1.10 in the United States, $1 being the FOB price, and 10% being ocean freight. There are no tariffs, or prior to this, there were no tariffs on Christmas ornaments. If we kind of take what is happening now with this current tariff regime that is in place, we're at 145% on that same Christmas ornament. So that Christmas ornament now has an FOB cost of $1, has a tariff cost of $1.45, and then it has that same 10% ocean, let's call it. So you're at $2.55 to land that ornament when that was $1.10. Okay? If we then take that and say, let's apply, I'm going to call it general margins in our industry. I'm going to say that vendors, gift vendors, operate on 50% margins on their wholesale pricing. So that $1.10 ornament would be $2 and let's call it 25 cents wholesale price. Selling to a retail partner, that retailer would take that $2.25 ornament, and I'm going to assume 50 points margin also. We can debate that. But that'd be, let's call it a $5 item, a little bit less at retail. So if you go back to, that's what it was before these tariffs were in place, to what it is now, right at that $250, $260 range, right, in terms of landed cost as it relates to that Christmas ornament with the 145% tariffs, which then turns into, let's call it a $5 wholesale, which then turns into a $10 retail. So you can see what these tariffs do to the margin structure of all the parties in the industry, and you can see how things get, you're basically going from let's call it a $5 retail pre-tariff to a $10 retail post-tariff. That's what these tariffs do to pricing in the industry if nothing else were to change around margin expectations from the vendor or the retailer, those kinds of things, okay? So we're seeing that happen. The second thing we're seeing, and we've seen this develop over the last week, is the vendor community in China is seeing Americans cancel their orders on them. Okay, I had an open order for X, Y, and Z, and I'm canceling that. That canceling is obviously hurting the vendor community over in China because they had expectations to ship these goods. They maybe procured raw materials. They had secured their labor. All the things that normal people would do running a business, they're trying to do, but now they have lots of cancellations going on. These cancellations are having now a different effect on the vendor community. The vendor community is coming to the retailers and or the vendors, like I call it a domestic vendor like Evergreen, and they're asking for prepayment of those purchase orders that have not shipped, right? Because they want to secure themselves against the downside risk of a cancellation and being stuck with that inventory. So as a vendor, as a retailer, maybe you had terms with your vendor in China, this and that. So this does have implications on your cash flow. You have to float the money to basically secure the production. And not only you have to do that, you're now paying 150% more than you were when you started this selling Christmas in December. So these are the two things that are kind of floating around in the industry that are going to have an impact, I think, on us moving forward. So let's talk about what that impact is, and I'm going to talk specifically on the vendor community. I think there's kind of three buckets of vendors that are going to be impacted most by this. The first bucket is obviously, and I would say if you can be in multiple buckets here in terms of risk, or excuse me, in terms of impact, so you can think about it this way. The first bucket obviously is going to be those vendors with high concentration of sourcing out of China. And I say vendor, you can say retailers also. Obviously, that one's pretty clear. If your product line is 90%, 100% out of China, you're most susceptible to this. The second one that I think you've got a high concentration risk, you got a high risk here related to, and I say the risk is related to either having to pass along price increases or availability inventory, are going to be those vendors that were selling, I'm calling it pre-booked goods at winter market. Those vendors who started to basically put their catalogs and their assortments together in December, maybe they walked into Dallas, Atlanta, Vegas, and were selling you Christmas, and they were selling that ornament at $1. They've collected all their orders. They're now basically placing production in China to ship that Christmas in August. And now they're at that decision point of it was $1, now it's $2.65, right? And they have to make decisions. And so anybody who had a high pre-booking in the first 90 days of the year and then has to then go place orders in China, that's susceptible. They definitely are going to be impacted by this. The final one I would put out there is any vendor who relies solely on a pre-booking model and doesn't have a domestic inventory position on the ground that they could maybe lean into. If you had to go buy 100% of your stuff in pre-booking in China, kind of you're checking all three boxes, that's going to be the most impacted vendor in our industry. I can, obviously very broadly, that's going to be your Christmas trim guys. When you think about it, a lot of them work on a pre-book model, high concentration of demand, short window of time, then turn around and order. If they don't have domestic inventory on the ground, it will be painful. If they don't offset what has like Christmas with spring seasonal or garden, it's more painful. So you kind of get an understanding of what this looks like, okay? So if you kind of, from a vendor perspective right now, vendors are kind of they're thinking about two things. And you saw about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, price surcharging start to flow through the industry. I'm going to give, hey, effective this date, here's a surcharge. Effective this date, there's a surcharge. And then that was before the extra 95% surcharges came on, or excuse me, tariffs came on. So people started to craft policy after April 2nd, the big date. We thought we knew where this was going. Pricing policy started to get crafted. Pricing policy started to get shared with retailers. And then we got the surprise, the extra 95%. And so I think the vendor community right now is sitting down trying to figure out how to price their goods. There's also, I believe, and we're taking this approach too, this has been fast and furious, and so a bit of a pause before setting policy. Pricing policy is probably wise. And I think a lot of vendors are doing this because some of us came out and started to price things, and then the rules of the road changed around tariffs. So vendors are trying to figure out how to price their assortments. I think there's going to be two ways they're going to price their assortments. The first is, I'm going to call a general surcharge on the entire line, regardless if it is in stock now, on order, out of India, out of Mexico, those kinds of things. Think of a general price increase. Why would you do this? Why does this make sense? I think this makes sense because it acts as a general shock absorber in terms of margin compression. The vendor will see due to tariff policy that has been very uncertain, okay? So you build in a general price increase, knowing that the China piece may go this way, Vietnam may go this way, those kinds of things, and you kind of give certainty to your retailers and certainty to your rep agencies so they understand what they could be selling at. Does that make sense? You may say, well, hey, that doesn't really seem fair. The domestic goods that are on the ground I shouldn't have to pay a tariff on those. I should pay a tariff here, this and that. I get it. But with so much volatility, a general price increase acts as a shock absorber and gives more consistent pricing, I think, across the assortment. And so you don't run into cases where the vendor had landed a Halloween item and they're selling it to you for $5 and the same piece type in Christmas is $10, right? Because that's gonna be hard for you as a retailer to justify talking to your end consumers in the store. And I think you get where I'm coming at, right? So that's the first one. So let's call it a general price increase or a general surcharge. The second thing you'll see, I think, is a segmentation approach or segment approach. Vendors will go out and say, hey, the inventory I have on the ground right now, that's this price. I've got a pool of goods I draw out of Mexico, it's this price. I have a pool of goods I pull out of China, it is this price. And they'll segment out and allocate that tariff risk and cost to appropriate pools of inventory. I think you'll see both of those probably come out. You can argue which one's good or bad. I can make the argument for both, but I think those are the two general approaches you'll see. When will these price increases start to come out? I don't know if it's later this month or early May. Some dust needs to settle. Everyone is trying to work with their vendor partners in China to understand is there cost mitigation you can do. There's an element here of we're just going to maybe sit and wait and see what the policy is and get clarity. And once we have clarity, we'll start making decisions. But I think you're going to probably see over the next 4 weeks some of these decisions start to be made. Okay. The other impact that is out there that is pretty meaningful for independent retailers and for our industry is this is the time our partners in China would typically be in production on fall, Halloween, Christmas, toys. Think of those goods that retailers are going to have on the shelf Q3, Q4. The challenge is the vendor community doesn't know what they're going to be paying for those goods because of the uncertainty in tariff policy. I also already shared with you what we're seeing in terms of the prepayment dynamic happening in the vendor community because of the cancellation risk and what they're asking for Americans, right? So maybe you were trying to buy, $10,000 worth of Christmas, and that was your budget when you started the year. To land that same number of goods is now going to be $25,000. So we all have to work within kind of budgets and cash flows and inventory models so you understand the difficulties that's going to create. I think what you're going to see, and let me go back. The other thing is, if they were to buy those goods and land those goods, what will the retail community do to their open orders for those goods that they are expecting to ship in July, August, September? That's an open question because there's only so much surcharging I think retailers will take. At some point, they will cancel, right? At some point, the retails just no longer make sense on the shelf. And you're trying to basically understand what I should buy, how much I should buy, when I should buy it, and then you have the flip side of what is the market retail, at what point will the end consumer walk away, what is the retailer's appetite for surcharging. That is difficult. I think what you will see is I think you will see some vendors will order it all and land it and then work on a surcharging platform or a policy. I think you will see some vendors will order some, not all, due to budget constraints, basically because they aren't sure what the market is for that item at this elevated cost. And I think you'll see some retailers just won't buy it. I think, I just think that's the third bucket you're going to see. I think at some point they can't procure and land those goods. Okay? That is going to create a deficit of inventory potentially in our industry over the next, let's call it the back half of the year. I'll get into kind of how I think this plays out and those kinds of things, but I would tell you, I think there's a lot of conversation now in the retail community, or at least in my circles, around what the price should be. And I think that may turn into how much inventory can I actually get as we move further into this and deeper into this. And let me talk to you about what that thinks, or what I think is happening. If these elevated rates stay on for, let's call it 2 to 4 weeks, what I think will happen is vendors will basically push back and ask their vendors in China to hold the inventory and then ship it 4 weeks later than they had planned. That will have an effect of goods that you thought were getting on August 1st or September 1st, so on and so forth, right? There'll be a pushing back. If this goes on for 90 days, 120 days, I think you're going to see much more of the cancellation. They just can't afford to land in the inventory. And so as a retailer, I would pay attention to this news cycle, and 2 to 3 to 4 weeks, it's probably a minor disruption, things shift late. If it goes much longer than that, you're going to have deficits of inventory available in the industry. Pretty certain about that. So as a retailer, my advice to you is probably, two things. I think I'm pretty certain that pricing and inventory availability will only degrade moving forward the longer these tariffs are on. My suggestion to you is, if you, depending on what camp you're in, I think this is going to be over in 2 weeks, JT, don't worry about it. I think this is going to be a longer term problem. I need to worry about it. I would recommend you go to your vendor base and work with them to secure up those seasonal goods I think are going to be impaired. And the impaired ones are fall, Halloween, Christmas, toys, call it back half of the year retail. If you can afford it, it may not be a bad thing to do. But like I said, if this is over in 2 weeks, it's not a concern. It goes longer, it's going to be a bigger concern. So you, as a retailer, have to make decisions best for your business, best for you, kind of your risk tolerance, kind of where you are on that. Okay. I think this plays out in 2 ways as it relates to the tariffs and what we're seeing now. You've got, I'm going to call it a short and a longer term view. The longer term view, and this is what Evergreen believes, is we think this is a 90 to 150 day elevated rate. We think it's going to take 90 days to 150 days for America and China to work out this difference in a more durable, longer term trade relationship and agreement. We're watching this play out in the posturing in real time. Last week it was, I'm going to elevate on tariffs. Yesterday is, we're not going to buy Boeing jets. Today is, we're not going to ship chips to China, and then critical minerals. Does that make sense? So like all of the TikTok is on here. A lot of the chess pieces are now on the board, but we need the leaderships of our 2 respective governments to come together and craft a durable agreement. We think that's 90 to 150 days from now. What we hope happens between now and then is some de-escalation around the 45 and 50% rates that were put on us in rapid succession when things escalate quickly. If we can start to get those off, availability of goods in the industry will improve, pricing of the goods in the industry will improve, and that's what we're hoping for. So look for those headlines as we get into May, and that's what we're looking for going forward. So as it relates to Evergreen, if you're a retailer purchasing from Evergreen, some thoughts for you to look at. The first thing is, depending on where you fall in terms of your belief about the tariff surcharges and their duration, you may want to revisit all of our warehouse positions that we have now across all the seasons and categories you're concerned about. We've got millions of dollars on the ground, and we're shipping within 24 or 48 hours. It's pretty quick. Our B2B website will give you the exact inventory availability of every single item we have on the ground, how many you can buy right now. The salespeople have the same tool in Eamon. And so if you have concerns, I'd engage your salesperson or our B2B website or our customer service person and do that. I don't want to, this is not a scare tactic. And this goes not only, but this is kind of our analysis of the situation. I want to share with our partners because it's really important that you're successful for us and all the vendor community in the long term, because we need each other. And I just want to communicate what we believe, what we see happening in real time. The second thing, as it relates to Evergreen. In my last video, I talked about our Evergreen Studio. We're offering thousands of products that we are basically finishing here and shipping from here. That is working great. That is free of both the tariffs and some of these other things. So look at kind of our made in Richmond products and choose from there. We are replenishing our Mexico warehouse weekly with containers of products. We've got a good Mexico seasonal, especially Halloween product that I would look at, as well as some everyday. And then we're going to continue to hold true on the pricing, on our decorative flags and mats. And so those are kind of three pillars around our assortment you can anchor around moving forward as a retailer. As it relates to what we are currently booking, which we refer to internally as Cycle 2, this is goods that ship later in the year. We are pricing them as we believe they are going to land. We believe we will have a more durable, longer-term tariff policy and trade policy with China 120 days from now. The goods we are selling now, we believe, are priced appropriately and will probably come in at lower rates than we're seeing now. Right now, the problem is Christmas. It's really going to be Christmas from an Evergreen perspective because our fall and Halloween is already here. Final thing is we're holding retailer calls every Friday. The CFO and I are talking to retailers every Friday, talking about what's going on. If you would like to participate in one of those, please drop me a note. If you would have any questions or concerns, please drop me a note. It is a complex subject. I hope I've explained this well. You may have to watch it once or twice, but please reach out with any questions. Thanks again.